Hi, everyone, and a pleasant good afternoon to you wherever you may be. I am AJ Abati, and welcome into the DuckQuack podcast. Welcome back for those of you who have followed us since we started last January. Um, we did take about a month off, and some things kind of happened quickly with some different things. First of all, my wife and I went on vacation about a month ago. My sister got married down in Branson, Missouri, and so we had a very fun time, about a week down there. And so I was planning on coming back and getting back into the swing of things with the podcast and whatnot. But we've had the opportunity to start a YouTube channel, which is how you're watching us here today. And that's a fun venture for my wife and I. We're actually starting a media company and called Duckbait Media. Of course, we started this several months ago, and looking forward to all the avenues that we can use our new company, and looking forward to doing some high school sports in the area, particularly here in Fort Scott and Fort Scott, Kansas, and looking forward to what we can do with that going forward. So, looking forward to it. We've still got some kinks to work out just in the initial thing, as far as getting everything that we need to make sure we have the best live stream out there for folks. But yeah, it is a YouTube channel. You're watching us on Duckbait TV, so thanks for joining us here for our podcast today, the Duck Quack. It's kind of interesting. My wife is a big fan of ducks, and so we are very much duck themed in a lot of ways, including the beard. Actually, not really, but anyway, it's fun. I'm excited to have this opportunity and to put this out there. And a huge thanks to my wife, Delyn, who really pushed me to get this started. So looking forward to it. Looking forward to everything that we can do with it. And yeah, it's going to be fun. I'm excited for what we can. If you're watching us on Duckbait TV, which is I think I'm still kind of new to this, so I'm assuming that's the only way you're watching us right now. But anyway, if you're watching us on Duckbait TV on YouTube, just hit that like button and hit the subscribe button as well. And there's a couple things you can do with that. First of all, there's no cost to subscribe. I'm not sure why that's the terminology that they used, but anyway, hit that subscribe button, and that'll come up in your YouTube when you call up youtube.com. That'll come up when we're live, and it'll be very easy for you to find us, is why you want to do that. So make sure you do that. Also, if you hit subscribe, that tells YouTube that people are watching us, and so they'll do some things for us, like archive our channel and things like that once we get to a certain threshold. I believe it's 1,000 subscribers. So make sure you hit that subscribe button, that like button, and tell your friends about us. We want to, first of all, we're going to record the podcast here, and basically just me talking about sports. But the biggest reason we want to really grow this is so that we can have a second avenue here in Fort Scott to have and broadcast high school sporting events. And so that's what we're the main deal. So I don't know that anybody really cares that much about listening to me or watching me, but they're going to want to watch their kids and their grandkids play sports. So definitely make sure you hit that like and subscribe, and that way we can tell YouTube that you're enjoying it, or at least watching it. Maybe not enjoying it, but watching it at least. And so that'll help us out. So anyway, thanks again for joining us here on the Duck Quack. We've never recorded this video-wise before. It's always been on more of an audio type situation, and so I've never had to figure out or think about a wardrobe before. I've also haven't had to think about the green walls in my office, and so we're gonna figure that out. I don't know that green is going to remain the color of the walls, and but I had a quick solution. I don't know that it was a good one, but a quick solution for the wardrobe situation, and that is I've got plenty of sports jerseys, and so we're gonna throw them out there and just probably try at least to wear a different one every episode, and it'll take me a while to get through all of them. I've got several. Went through a really big jersey buying phase here a few years ago, and so I've got a lot to choose from, and a lot of them are very similar. But anyway, this one that I'm wearing today is my most recent jersey purchase, and a couple of reasons for that. First of all, it's a Chiefs jersey, if you can't tell. It is Kadarius Toney's Chief jersey, and a couple of reasons for that. When the Chiefs traded for him, I didn't really think too much about him being a great player for the Chiefs as he was at the end of the season last year, or anything like that. Two things. First of all, my friends and family call me Tony, so we've got the same name. And then on the other hand of that, 19 was my football number. I wore 19. I wasn't good, but when I played football in high school, I wore number 19, which is, if I can turn the right way here, that's another thing about the camera is trying to figure out. It's not a mirror. So I keep thinking it's a mirror. Oh, I need to turn this, but it's not. And so you can see everything the right way. I got to turn the opposite direction. So anyway, so it's number 19, Kadarius Toney, and so anyway, first time I saw him on screen, whatever, after the Chiefs traded for him, I told my wife, I was like, that might need to be a Christmas gift, and so we worked that out. So anyway, so it's one of many. You'll see several, I'm sure, if I continue with this as we move along. But yeah, looking forward to it. So I don't have any notes on this. We're getting this started, and we're kind of throwing this out there and seeing what happens and how we get going with it. And so I didn't make any notes. I didn't know if this would work today or not. So I'm just going to kind of go by the seat of my pants a little bit here, which if you're familiar with our podcast is a little tricky at times because I can go down some definite wormholes, but I'll try to keep that at a minimum here today. But one thing I wanted to get to talking about, it is week 0 of the college football season. I don't know why it's not week 1. I don't understand that. State of Tennessee did that for their high school for a long time, may even still be that way. And the essence of it is if you play in week 0, you get an extra bye week. Or a bye week period, like in high school. In the state of Tennessee, if you play in week 0, you get a bye week because they play 10 games, and you have 10 weeks to the season. But if you play in week 0, which of course is the week before week 1, you get a bye week. And I don't understand why it's not just week 1. Why not just say, hey, we've got 11 weeks like the NFL does, right? But there's 17 games and you've got 18 weeks. I don't understand why that's that hard, but that's the way it is. So anyway, it's week 0 of the college football season. There's a few games today. I know Notre Dame is playing Navy today, which is kind of interesting. And so really with that in mind, I kind of wanted to get to a little bit of the conference realignment situation going on in college football and college sports in general. And with that in mind, I'm just going to share what I think about it. And first of all, I don't like it. I've said that before. I'm not a fan of the realignment situation in any way, shape, or form. Really, I think that we're getting too far away from what college athletics is really supposed to be about. It is supposed to be an avenue for kids to further their education. And we're just not in a situation where people are thinking about that clearly, because we're getting away from things that make sense and realizing that football players and basketball players and soccer players have class during the week. That's part of being a collegiate athlete, a student athlete. The NCAA wants to drive home student athlete. I worked in college athletics for several years when I was in college and a few years after college, and that was a big thing. We couldn't say athletes. We had to say student athletes. We had to drive home the student part. Well, what's the NCAA doing? Allowing USC to join a conference with Rutgers if they're really worried about the student. And it's less of a big deal, I understand, with football because you only play once a week, but it's a big deal because all the other sports get drug into this. It's not football separated by itself. It's football and basketball. You play twice a week in basketball. Baseball, you play up to 5 times in a week. Baseball, you play a 3-game weekend series. It's a conference series. You'll play 2 midweek games, at least 1, maybe 2, depending on your scheduling. And so you're playing, and softball's got a similar schedule to baseball, of course. So you're not thinking clearly if you think, in my opinion, if you think this is a good idea. I mean, I understand the Pac-12 is failing financially, apparently. It's not something I really looked into, but apparently that's the case because everybody left the Pac-12. Um, and so there's an issue with that. Um, but I don't understand why that has to be the main goal, to make money. I mean, I understand that that's an a side of it, an offspring of it, however you want to, whatever terminology you want to use there. But it's I can't think of the right word I'm thinking about. But anyway, it's part of it. I get that at this stage. There's a lot of money to be made in especially college football and men's college basketball. There's a lot of money to be made in both of those sports, and I get it. I understand. People want to maximize their earning potential. That's why we have NIL deals now for college athletes. So that's part of it. I get it. I understand it. But at the end of the day, what about the soccer players that are going to miss 4 days of class because of a weekend road trip where they're playing on Thursday and Saturday in, clear across the country? There was a video somebody posted here recently, softball players, Pac-12 softball players, that were interviewed about this, and they complained. Every single one of them complained because their schedule and their college life and their daily options are completely messed up. They're not now going to be able to do college things. Join a sorority. Join a fraternity if you're a baseball player. You're not going to be able to do those kinds of things. Go hang out with your friends because, well, we got to leave on Tuesday because we've got or Wednesday because we've got a series across the country. For people that don't understand, and I know more about basketball than baseball or softball, but I did travel with both. So here's the thing with basketball. Let's start with basketball. For those who are not aware, if you've got a basketball game on a Wednesday night, this isn't high school where you leave, if the game starts at 7, you're leaving at 3:30 or 4. You leave the day before because basketball, you get there and it's kind of like a get settled type thing, right? So you get there, you have to have a practice the day before in that arena where you're going to play the next night. And then the next day, you're going to have a walkthrough at that arena. And so a lot of teams, if you're KU and you're playing West Virginia on a Wednesday night, you leave on Tuesday morning to maximize the amount of travel time that you have. So you're going to leave on Tuesday morning. So you miss all day class Tuesday. You're going to miss all day class Wednesday because you're going to be in West Virginia. So you get there on Tuesday, you have practice, then you go to dinner, and then you chill out. Maybe you watch some film, whatever the case may be. The next day, you're going to get up, you're going to have breakfast, then you're going to go to the gym for a shoot around or a walk through. Football, they call it a walk through. Basketball, they call it a shoot around most of the time. You're going to do that. Then you're going to go have some lunch. Maybe you have lunch first before the shoot around. But either way, then you're going to go have your team meal for your dinner. Then you go back to the gym, play the game. As soon as the game's over, you're going to get on a bus to go to the airport to fly back. But if you're Kansas and you're in West Virginia, you're not going to get done until, and say it's, ESPN's picked it up because it's, top 5, both teams are in the top 5 or top 10, which has happened before with Kansas and West Virginia. Then it's a late night, right? It's an 8 p.m. start Kansas time, which means 9 p.m. start in West Virginia, which means it's not going to get over until at least 11, which means you're not leaving West Virginia on that plane until after midnight. So you're coming, and you may stay the night. Some teams do that, not a lot, but some. So then you're coming back, you're getting back, if you leave that night, you're getting back early the next morning. No, you're not going to get up for class on Thursday. So now you've missed class on Tuesday, you've missed class on Wednesday, and you've missed class on Thursday because of one game. You've missed 3 days of class because of one game. Now, it's different for football because you're playing on Saturdays every week. So you take the time to come back home. You rest up on Sunday. You don't have to worry about class, of course, on Saturday or Sunday. There's a lot of schools out there, especially in the fall, that will have classes Monday through Thursday, so you're not worried about Friday classes. So I get that. Football, maybe you don't miss any class time at all, depending on the road trip where you're going and all that. But it's a similar situation because if you're playing Saturday, you're going to leave Friday morning, stay the night Friday, get up Saturday, have your walkthrough, go eat, come back to the field, that kind of thing. So maybe you're lucky enough that you don't have classes on Friday if you're a football player, but, not everybody has that luxury. And if it was just football, it'd be one thing, which brings up a Chip Kelly comment that I'm going to get to in just a minute. But it's really frustrating because, like I said, if it's just football, it'd be one thing. It's not, though. It's your main sports. It's your football, it's your men's and women's basketball, it's your volleyball, it's your baseball, your softball. That's what's being affected. It's not just football. And so you get to a situation where you've got softball players that are really upset about it. And I don't blame them at all. I'm sure baseball players feel the same way. Basketball players, I don't know. Some basketball players don't care about going to class. They're, especially the one and done guys, they're not going to class anyway, right? So it doesn't make any difference. But it's definitely a struggle. And it's something that I feel like the NCAA needs more power, or some central body needs more power to dictate those kinds of things. And if they need to say, and I don't have a problem with this, if they need to say, hey, you know what, we need to figure out a revenue sharing system between the Power 5 conferences so that there is no financial advantage to being in the SEC or the Big 10 or the Big 12 or whatever. Because that's what's happened. The SEC and the Big 10 have much better TV deals, and so they're much more desirable to be in for people, which is ludicrous. Absolutely ludicrous, in my opinion. I mean, again, you're forcing UCLA volleyball players to play midweek conference games on the East Coast. It's insane. And I think most people are looking at this going, this is the dumbest thing ever. I really think the only people that are thinking, hey, this is a good idea, are the people making those decisions because, hey, we're going to make more money this way. So it's a frustrating time for me, to be honest. And it's not, something that I'm really excited to go through as a fan. I think that, for me, as a Kansas fan, it's a little different because the teams added in the Big 12, we're in the middle of the conference. So it's a little bit different, Kansas going to Florida to play UCF is not Arizona going to Florida to play UCF. And I understand people are going to schedule those kinds of games in the non-conference, and that's fine. But you can work around it if it's in a non-conference. If the conference is scheduling it, there's only so many situations where you can say, okay, Arizona, when they play UCF, it's got to be a weekend. There's only so many things before you run out of, because you would say, oh yeah, well, Arizona State needs to go there on a weekend too, and Colorado needs to go there on a weekend too, and Utah needs to go there on a weekend, and so does BYU, They need to go there on a weekend, and all of a sudden now you're out of weekends for a basketball season or a volleyball season, because now you've used up all your Saturdays, and now UCF has to play Arizona on a Tuesday night or a Wednesday night, and it's hard to do that for a conference and make that schedule smart, without any kind of travel partners. And the big conferences aren't going to do travel partners. They're not, because that limits the matchups that you can have in prime time. Because if you have travel partners, all of a sudden Alabama and Auburn are playing the same day as Georgia and Florida, and they're playing the same day as Texas and Texas A&M, right? Or whatever. And so you limit now, okay, now we've got 4 marquee matchups at the same time, so not all of them are going to be shown in primetime. And that reduces money that you're making out of the TV deal, right? I mean, that's, if you've got 4 marquee games, but they all got to be played at 3 o'clock on a Saturday afternoon, then you only have 1 ESPN, right? And 1 ESPN2 and 1 Fox and 1, it's not like you can put all 3 of them on Fox at the same time. It's not going to happen. So it's a frustrating thing, because you're going to have the long trip midweek games. You're going to have those, and it's just, I don't know. I think it's stupid. So anyway, moving on to what Chip Kelly said a few days ago, and I've kind of worked this out. These things I like to do, don't really mean anything, but anyway, it's something that I like to try is maybe a different way of doing things. So what Chip Kelly said the other day was, why don't, Notre Dame is independent for football. They're in a conference, of course, the ACC right now for most things. They're in the ACC right now for most everything else. Basketball, baseball, volleyball, most everything else. They're in a couple other conferences for some side sports like hockey, some of those kinds of things. They're in some different conferences for some of those other sports, but what they are, just lost my train of thought. But anyway, obviously they are independent for football, and for some reason it's still working for them. It's kind of crazy, but it's still working for them. And so Chip Kelly had a tweet. I'm sure most of you probably saw it a few weeks ago. Why don't we all go independent for football? And then the conferences for the other sports can go back to normal, and we're good. And I think that's kind of an intriguing idea. I personally don't like that. I think if you're in a conference, you need to be in that conference. It bugs me that there are teams, and it's usually the lower end, the mid-major schools. So like North Dakota State is an example. North Dakota State's football program is in the Missouri Valley Conference. But they are not in that conference for basketball. Even though that conference has basketball, they're not in that conference for basketball. They are in the Summit League for basketball. But the Summit League doesn't do football. So they got to find somebody else to do. So it bugs me that they're in different. I hate that. I hate that if you're in a conference for football that also has basketball, like the Missouri Valley Conference, then you need to be in that conference, in my opinion, for everything. Unless that conference doesn't sponsor that sport, and there's some side sports like soccer and beach volleyball and hockey and things like that, where not every conference has are sponsoring those. But the Missouri Valley sponsors football and basketball. And if you're going to be in it for football and you have a basketball team, you might as well be in it for basketball too. And then you've got some leagues out there that, if they're not going to do football, okay, but you can't have schools that participate in football. Like, it bugs me that that's the case. But we're moving past that now, down the road, and I think that this Chip Kelly idea is a possibility. Anyway, I like the thought of it, at least. So he said, do the top 64 as independents. And so I kind of took that idea and ran with it. So here's what I would suggest to do. He said top 64. I think that's a good number. I always like the even numbers, 64, 32, 16. Those are good numbers to use in sports. And so I think that's a good idea. The question becomes, which 64 teams do you choose? Because I was looking through it, and before the Big 12 added Cincinnati, Houston, BYU, and UCF, there were 65 Power 5 conference teams. So 65 teams in the Big 10, SEC, Big 12, Pac-12, and ACC before the additions for this season of Cincinnati, Houston, BYU, and UCF. There were 65. I don't know. I probably said that too many different ways. But anyway, there were 65 Power 5 conference teams. So who do you leave out is the question. And I know a lot of people are probably going to say, well, Kansas Jayhawks, leave them out. Because we're only talking about football right now. And I can see why somebody would say that. I'm a Kansas Jayhawk fan, so I did not do that. But I can see why somebody might say KU. I could see why somebody might say Wake Forest. I could see why somebody, again, we're only talking about football right now. We're not talking about any other sport. We're just talking about football. Duke. Vanderbilt, to me, would be a big one to leave out because, when was the last time Vanderbilt was good at football? So, but what I ended up doing was adding BYU and leaving out, because the Pac-12 left them out, leaving out Stanford and Cal. So I didn't leave out the other Pac-12 schools that got left out, Washington State and Oregon State, just simply because of their rivalries with Oregon and Washington, and they're obviously in. So I ended up leaving Stanford and Cal out. They've got a natural rivalry. Basically, I put them in the Mountain West Conference, and I'll kind of explain that in a minute. But that's what I came up with. So anyway, so here's my 64. I split them into two conferences, just like the pros. So there's two conferences, 8 divisions, 8 teams in each division. Okay, so in the Eastern Conference and the Central Division, I've got Indiana, and it's based on geography mainly. Not 100%, but mainly geography. So in the Central Division in the Eastern Conference, Indiana, Kentucky, Louisville, Michigan, Michigan State, Notre Dame, Ohio State, and Purdue. In the Coastal Division, I've got Clemson, Duke, Maryland, Miami, NC State, North Carolina, South Carolina, and Wake Forest. In the Northeast Division, I've got Boston College, Penn State, Pittsburgh, Rutgers, Syracuse, Virginia, Virginia Tech, and West Virginia. And in the Southeast Division, I've got Alabama, Auburn, Florida, Florida State, Georgia, Georgia Tech, Tennessee, and Vanderbilt. Then in the Western Conference, I've got Illinois, Iowa. This is in the Midwest Division. Illinois, Iowa, Iowa State, Minnesota, Missouri, Nebraska, Northwestern, and Wisconsin. In the Mountain Division, I've got Baylor, BYU, Colorado, K-State, Kansas, TCU, Texas Tech, and Utah. In the Pacific Division, Arizona, Arizona State, Oregon, Oregon State, UCLA, USC, Washington, and Washington State. And in the Southwest Division, Arkansas, LSU, Mississippi State, Oklahoma, Oklahoma State, Ole Miss, Texas, and Texas A&M. So that's the 64 that I would choose to do with that. And I think there's some really cool opportunities to kind of change things up a little bit. So you've got 64 teams there. I think it's perfect to do a 32-team postseason tournament. Every division champ is guaranteed in, and then everybody else by record, just like the NFL does, by record and tiebreakers. And I think that would be great. You don't have any committees. You don't have any, make it clear cut. This is how this is going to go. And I think that's a good idea for those schools. Because here's the other thing. Another one of us talking heads, Colin Cowherd made a comment a couple of weeks ago when all this came down. We need better games. Okay, I don't know that all 12 need to be super competitive for everybody, but he says, we need better games. We're going to make more money. We need better games. Okay, all right. So here's your better games. Those 64 teams that are in the top, what I would call FBS in my system here, they're only playing those 64 teams. That's it. So you would play everybody in your division once. That's 7 games. You would play everybody in the other 3 divisions in your conference that finished in your same spot. So the NFL does this. It's competitive balance scheduling. There's a couple games every year where you play teams that finished in the same spot. So if you're Alabama, let me pull up. I worked through what last year's results would look like if we did this. Now I got to find it here. Hold on a second. There we go. All right, so last year's results would have looked like this. So in the Southeast Division, Georgia would have been first, Tennessee, Alabama, Florida State, Florida, Georgia Tech, Vanderbilt, and Auburn. So the non-division games for Alabama for this season would look like this. They finished third, so they're going to play the third team in the Northeast, which was Syracuse. They're going to play the third team in the Coastal Division, which was Duke. And they're going to play the third team in the Central Division, which was Notre Dame. So that gets you to 10 games. And then you'd play the third team in a couple divisions in the other conference. So I think I've got them playing the Pacific and the Southwest divisions. Because I went through and I made a schedule for this year too. So Alabama would play Mississippi State, and they would play Oregon. So their non-division games would be Oregon, Mississippi State, Notre Dame, Duke, and Syracuse. Now, none of those are Georgia Southern or Samford or any of those other bye-week schools that they play right before Auburn, right? But they're also not, because Alabama finished third. They lost on the field to Tennessee, so they lost the head-to-head. They finished tied 10-2 with Tennessee, but Tennessee got the tiebreaker for beating them on the field. And then, of course, Georgia finished 12-0. So they would have finished third by a tiebreaker in their division. So they're playing schools that they should beat fairly easily. I mean, you think about Alabama going up against Syracuse, Duke, and Notre Dame. 2 of those ought to be pretty darn easy wins for them. Notre Dame, probably a couple touchdown win for them. And then when you think about the other side, they'll probably have more trouble with the other side with Mississippi State and Oregon. But those are probably winnable games for them. And then, of course, their own division. Tennessee's going to be tough this year. Georgia's going to be tough this year. But everybody else pretty much, they should win those games too. So if you think about, better games, they're higher profile games, of course. But I think it's good. On the flip side, you look at Georgia, their non-division schedule would be Penn State, Clemson, Michigan, LSU, and USC. So you want to talk about better games? There's your better games right there. Okay? So you're gonna have Georgia, or you would if this went through. Georgia, again, they're non-division games. There's 5 of them. Non-division games would be Penn State, Clemson, Michigan, USC, and LSU. Those would be pretty tough games. Pretty good games. Games that I would think Colin Cowherd would want to watch. Because he made that comment too. He said, opening weekend, Labor Day weekend. I was looking through there. There's only 2 games I want to watch. Well, I'm sorry, Colin, but you're not a college football fan if you only want to watch 2 college football games in a weekend. I'm just saying. But, because, I mean, I don't care. I don't care what it is. It's college football. I'm going to watch it. Doesn't matter. I watch more college football than I watch pro football. College football is fun. It's always on, right? It starts at 11 and it doesn't stop until 11. Like it's 12 straight hours. Like the NFL, you have windows, right? So you have the noon window in the Central Time Zone, of course, the noon window, the 1 Eastern window, and the 4 Eastern window. And if all your 1 o'clock games are over before your 4 o'clock games start, then there's a lull because there's 20 minutes, 15 minutes where there's nothing going on. Doesn't happen very often, but it's happened a time or two. And so it's kind of weird. I could care less about the studio guys, which is weird because I was a journalism major in college. So, but I could care less about the studio guys. I don't want to hear about your analysis. I want to watch the game. I want to form my own analysis, so to speak. And so, yeah, I mean, that's just kind of how I feel about it. And that's what you can do that with college football because there's always something on. There's enough staggered starting times where there's always a game on. So that's and to me, I don't care. I don't care. If it's Oregon State, Arizona State, I'm probably going to watch it, especially if that's the only game on at 11:30 at night. I'm going to watch it. Because that's just me. Not everybody's like that. I get it. And I'm not going to sit here and debate over who's a more dedicated fan or whatever. But I love college football. And if it's college football, I can watch it. Even if I don't agree with it being called week 0, I'll watch it. Because it's fun. It's exciting to me. And it doesn't matter who the teams are to me. And I want to watch more than just Alabama and Georgia and Michigan and Ohio State. I want to watch more than that. I want to know. I'm excited about the expansion of the playoffs because I want more teams involved. I don't think. I mean, watch basketball. Some people, well, it's still going to be the same. I don't know. Basketball. How many times has Kansas won the national championship in basketball? Hadn't happened that often because there's a big tournament, and sometimes they get upset. And I think that's going to happen more often. I think we're going to see that with the expansion of the playoffs. Can't remember if it's next year or the year after when they go from, I think it's up to 12. Eventually, I could see us getting to a point where we're 16 or 32. But it'll be interesting to see how things go. But again, I went down a rabbit hole. But again, if you want better games, this is a way to do it. Because like I said, Georgia's non-division games, because they finished first in their division, Penn State, Clemson, Michigan, LSU, and USC. With division games, Tennessee, Alabama, Florida State, Florida, Georgia Tech, Vanderbilt, and Auburn. That's a heck of a schedule. That's a schedule where Georgia's like, yeah, we do need a 32-team playoff because we may not make the playoffs if it's less than that, So, yeah, I think that would be great. We'll see if it happens or not, but I think that's something to think about. Like I said, postseason, I'd have 32 teams, top 16 in each conference. So, like for instance, I put this down too. So last year's playoffs would look like this. So your Eastern Conference, what I've really gotten to where I like, and you could do it a couple different ways. You could do the 4 division winners of the top 4 seeds, and then everybody else after them. What I like is kind of the NBA rule, where you seed everybody by record, and then the division champions will host, regardless of who they end up playing. So, for example, in the Western Conference, Illinois won their division because their division was not good. Would have won their division at 8-4, because their division consists of Illinois, Minnesota, Iowa, Wisconsin, who had a terrible season last year, Missouri, Iowa State, Nebraska, and Northwestern. That's their division. So they won their division with an 8-4 record. So they would be the 10 seed in the Western Conference, but they would be at home against K-State because they won their division. K-State did not win their division. I like that idea. That way the seedings work out a little bit better. You've got it would put Ohio State as the 3 seed in the East. So you'd have Georgia as 1, then Michigan, Ohio State, Tennessee. That's your top 4. Alabama, Penn State, Clemson, Florida State. That's your top 8. North Carolina, Notre Dame. Pitt is 11, Duke 12, NC State 13, South Carolina 14, Purdue 15, and then Kentucky 16. Some of the tiebreakers, of course, would be head-to-head. If that applies, that would be the first one. Divisional champion is another tiebreaker. Would be so if you've got the same record as a division champ. So Illinois would fall into that group. They're 8-4. There's a whole list of 8-4 teams, but they're the 8-4 team that won their division. So they're at the top of that heap, right? And then point differential, because not everybody's going to play everybody. So point differential would be one, and then total points scored, total points allowed to go down the list there. So anyway, so that's how the East would look. The West would look like this. TCU would be 1, USC would have been 2, Washington 3, LSU 4, Utah 5, Oregon 6, K-State 7, UCLA 8, Oregon State 9, Illinois 10, Minnesota 11, Texas 12, Mississippi State 13, Ole Miss 14, 15 Iowa, and 16 Oklahoma State. So, I don't know. I think that's kind of, a possibility. I think it's kind of an intriguing, you think about the first round there. Georgia plays Kentucky in Georgia, because that's another part of this. The first 2 rounds would be on campus, and then you'd start to go to bowl sites for the quarterfinals, the semifinals, and the championship would be the same, would be the New Year's Six Bowls. The other 4 of the New Year's Six Bowls would be the quarterfinal matchups, and then the semifinals like they would be normally, and then the championship games. So Kentucky at Georgia, first round of the playoffs. Purdue at Michigan, first round of the playoffs. South Carolina at Ohio State, first round of the playoffs. NC State at Tennessee, first round of the playoffs. There's some interesting matchups for the first couple rounds on campus, and then you get deep in the tournament and just kind of see what happens. But again, that's using last year's results for this particular model that I would use, and I don't know. I think it's intriguing because you get some of that. You get better games, like Colin Cowherd was saying. Hey, we need better games. Okay, well, you got better games that way because you'd schedule differently. The other thing for me, I don't know. I think it would be better in that way. The other thing too is then you would take your group of 5 schools, and I would group them with the other FCS schools. So then you would have a tournament of Boise State and Tulane with North Dakota State and South Dakota State. And I think that's something that could be intriguing to folks as well. I think there's a lot of folks in North Dakota and South Dakota that think that the Bison and the Jackrabbits can be very competitive, in big-time college football. They haven't made that move yet, but I think the people in those places think that's a possibility. And I think with the traditions that have been built in some of those places, Sam Houston is going to get that opportunity this year as they moved up to Conference USA. So we'll see how that goes. Jacksonville State also moved up to Conference USA, so we'll see how that goes for those schools. And I think that some of those, you could throw Illinois State in that group as well. There's a handful, Montana State, that could be very competitive with schools like Boise State and UCF and Western Michigan, or Central Michigan. Some of those schools that have been, that group of 5 team to go on and make a big bowl game here over the last few years. So I think that's something that is kind of intriguing too, and I really think that would be a very competitive tournament when you throw in those teams with together. So I think that's a very interesting situation and something that I think is very possible for going forward in college football. Then you move on to basketball and all the other sports, and then if you separate football, you get an opportunity to kind of redo college basketball if you wanted. And I think that one of the things that I've worried about is college basketball essentially going away, because I really feel if we don't get a handle on this conference realignment situation soon, then there's a possibility that we get to a point where it's completely different. And you've got the Power 5 conference teams, and they're all separated away in every sport from the group of 5 schools, and they're separated in every sport from the FCS football schools and the lower tier, the lower major schools. And then, of course, they'd be separated, of course, from Division II and Division III. And so you'd end up with, instead of 3 national championships every year in basketball or women's basketball, you'd end up with 6 or 7, like high school. And I think that can cheapen the titles to an extent, because you're not having to compete against as many different teams and different styles. The other thing is, the thing that makes the NCAA men's tournament great is the first weekend, when you have a 14 beat a 3, or a 12 beat a 5, or a 16 beat a 1. If you separate the Power 5 teams from the mid-major teams, that goes away. That goes away in college basketball. The College World Series isn't the same, because that goes away for college baseball. ORU from Tulsa last year, upsetting a couple of teams in regionals or super regionals and going to the College World Series, that doesn't happen anymore. James Madison, JMU, went to the Women's College World Series a few years ago. That goes away because of separating the mid-majors from the Power 5. So I don't like that thought, and I feel like that's where we're headed if we don't get a handle on this somewhat quickly. And if you do this and you kind of separate football off and have it on its own, in its own world, which again I don't like, but I think that's better than the alternative. Because if you separate football away, then basketball gets to stay the same, baseball gets to stay the same, softball, it all stays the same, and hopefully you could go back. I don't know how likely that is, but I feel like that's even a possibility. To turn the clock back a little bit for some of those other sports. So I don't know. It'll be interesting to see how all of that goes. But I'm always looking forward to the college football season. We're middle of the day here on Saturday, and I think that means Notre Dame's playing right now. Kansas City, the Chiefs are playing their final preseason game this week. I got a text to something that they're not playing well. Well, it's the final preseason game, so I haven't watched it, but I'm assuming no Mahomes, no Travis Kelce, no, the studs are not out there today because they're already on the team. I mean, that's what the last preseason game is for, right? It's the fringe players trying to make the team. It's not for the starters that are going to be there week one, and you want to make sure that they're there week one. I turned it on to watch the opening kick in the first couple series, and somebody for the Browns is already hurt, like already in a cast. I think that was the opening kickoff that they got somebody hurt. You don't want that to happen to your big time players, so they're not going to be. They might be in the jerseys on the sideline. They might have suited up, but they're not going to play, and that's a good thing. I think in this particular preseason game, you want those guys to play. You want those guys to get in and get some reps before the season starts. I think that's something that has been proven, especially with Aaron Rodgers over the last few years, that it takes you in the NFL 2 or 3 weeks to kind of get back in the groove, and you want that to happen in the preseason so you're ready for week one. You don't want to take the first 3 weeks because, especially in the NFL, if you lose the first 3 games, isn't there some kind of stat that if you lose the first 2 games or something, your chances of making the playoffs go down to like single digit percentage. So you don't want to start behind the 8 ball. It takes a lot to recover. I just saw something. Seattle Mariners in the last couple of weeks, they made up 10 games in the standings. You can't do that in the NFL. There's not enough games to be able to do that. So you don't want to get behind the 8 ball too soon. So I think playing in the preseason is important for your stars, but you definitely want to limit it to a point so that they don't get injured and don't have some of those kinds of issues. So, but anyway, the Chiefs lose today. Who cares? Week one is in a couple of weeks, and they'll be ready for it, and I'm excited about it. So, but anyway, college football is going strong, and looking forward to that. Like I said, I usually have some notes. I don't today. This is just kind of on a whim, trying to see if this will work for us. So we're gonna leave it right there. But it's it's good to get back into the swing of things a little bit here with the podcast. Again, if you're watching on DuckBait TV, and again, that should be the way that most of you are getting this today. But if you're watching on DuckBait TV on YouTube.com, make sure to hit that like and subscribe buttons. There's 2 different buttons. I keep saying it like there's one. There's 2 of them. So make sure you hit those. And again, that'll basically tell that tells YouTube that people are watching. And again, for the podcast, not that important, but for the Tiger football games, the Tiger going forward, Tiger basketball games, those kinds of things that we want people to watch here in Fort Scott, Kansas, or want to make it possible for people to watch here in Fort Scott, Kansas. That's important. So again, if you're watching us on DuckBait TV, make sure to hit that like and subscribe, and that'll help us out. So anyway, thanks again for joining us here on the podcast, and we're looking forward to lots of cool things to come in the next few weeks and beyond for DuckBait TV. So anyway, thanks for joining us, and good day, Kansas.